intro today. Hi everyone, thanks very much for coming this morning. Hope you had a chance to grab some breakfast, and welcome to those who are joining us on the live stream as well. I'm Jennifer Bachner. I direct the Government Analytics program here at Johns Hopkins. And I'm thrilled today because we have Vanessa Perez, who's one of our adjunct faculty members, a lecturer here in the GAB Analytics program. She's an expert on elections, and she'll be talking about how the current campaigns are using data to shape both their persuasion and mobilization strategies. So certainly a timely presentation. Just a bit of background. So the purpose of this breakfast forum is to bring together professionals from government, industry, and academia to talk about some of the innovative ways that the public sector is using analytics. We hold the breakfast about every other month, and it's a really nice community that we've built. It's a very conversational setting, and so we certainly encourage your insights and input. I'll let Vanessa let you know if she wants you to jump in with questions during the presentation or hold them until the end so she can address that. We encourage you to join us on social media. You can tweet about the event using the hashtag GAB Forum. We are, as you know, live streaming and also videotaping the event, and a recording of the event will be available on both the GAB Analytics website and the REI Systems website about 24 to 48 hours after the event. So if you want to pass it along to a colleague or someone else who might be interested, that would be great. So again, thank you very much for being here and joining us. We certainly want your participation, and I'll now turn the program over to Jeff Myers from REI Systems.
Thanks, Jen. I want to tell you a little bit about why we created these forums, and the primary purpose actually is to create a community so that folks who are interested in government analytics have a chance to confer and meet with each other and say, hey, I've got a problem, can you help me solve it? Or to hear from speakers about how real problems have been identified and solved. A little bit of it is about the techniques, but a lot of it is also just kind of about creating the community. We want to have a chance to discuss kind of analytics in a broad way. So if you followed several of these forums, you'll realize that they're different speakers, completely different agencies, different topics. And so government analytics does tend to have kind of a wide definition. It might be helpful perhaps if as you're offering some of your introductory remarks, you say about kind of what it is you mean about analytics. Some folks have expressed interest in that. But the end purpose is actually to improve government performance and effectiveness by using analysis and using data and trying to kind of connect that with decision making. Just briefly, REI Systems is a company that works with a wide variety of government agencies, and we help them with their data. So for example, we developed and operate data.gov, and we work with a wide variety of primarily civilian government agencies, helping them identify and manage their data, expose it to the public where they choose to do so, and get value from it to inform their decision making. I'd like to introduce formally Dr. Vanessa Perez. She is on the faculty here at Johns Hopkins. She holds, in fact, every degree she's ever earned from Columbia University, including a PhD in political science. She's going to talk with us, I think, about electoral analysis, and we thought, of course, with the upcoming election, that's timely. But actually, what I'd like to ask you all in the audience to think about, and perhaps even ask Dr. Perez some questions about, is, are there ways that this could help, in fact, after the election, some government agencies administratively better engage stakeholders, understand what stakeholders' needs and concerns are, and ensure that public services are responsive to those stakeholders, learning maybe from some of the same techniques that are used with analytics during the electoral cycle. I want to briefly also mention that REI hosts a similar breakfast to this in conjunction with George Washington University that focuses on grants and grant making, and that on November 10th, 2 days after the election, we'll have the results and a panel of government grant making officials from the state and local and federal levels talk about the results of our annual survey of grant makers and about what grant maker challenges and problems are, and about how perhaps the incoming administration can do a better job of carrying out government missions in cases where the federal government doesn't actually do the work, but instead makes grants to other entities that then carry out the mission activities. If you have any questions, certainly you've got the contact information for REI as well as for Johns Hopkins in the blue packet that you received as you registered. And if you don't have that packet, you can certainly collect it on your way out. But thank you very much for agreeing to speak with us, Vanessa. She has indicated that she'll be happy to have questions as we go through the presentation. So please ask questions. It'll make for a better discussion.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and everybody. Thank you for having me here today. Like Jeff mentioned, I'm happy to take the questions as we go along. and I'm very excited to be here, especially just a few weeks before the election. Do I have to get a bit closer to it? Is that fine?
I think that's fine.
So, like many of you, I've been following this election for a while now, and what struck me early on, especially since the primary started around January, was that I kept reading all these articles about how Trump has no ground game. He is not using any kind of data analytics. So I read just after Iowa, it just doesn't look like he has any kind of ground game, and maybe that's why he lost. And week after week, month after month, Trump's has a ground game problem. And in New Hampshire, he had not a data-driven outreach. But then again, I kept seeing all this news that Trump wins the New Hampshire primary. He wins Virginia. And he wins Florida. So this is interesting and surprising because it contradicts everything we know about data analytics. It contradicts everything we've heard. Data analytics have become the staple of the modern campaign. So how can that be that? How can it be that Trump is winning all these elections and has no data-driven effort at all? And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Well, let me get in here. So this whole thing persisted up until the convention, and maybe you might remember that Trump Jr. said, well, we need a president who speaks his mind and not just when it behooves him to do so, who doesn't have to run a focus group or use data analytics to form an opinion. So this is again surprising because the primaries are over and still the campaign is pushing this idea that we don't need to use data analytics to run the election. Trump very famously said that data analytics is overrated. So I felt it was overrated. Obama got the votes much more so than this data processing machine. And I think the same is true for me. So does that mean that we should just forget about all this government analytics stuff and just forget it? No data analytics, does that mean victory? Well, on Trump's quote, he's not too far away from the truth about that. If you talk to anybody on either side of the campaign, they will tell you that data analytics is not going to win you an election. But then again, it's also not true that we should just drop everything and forget it and not use data. So I will talk about what it means to use data analytics in an election. Just to give you the overview, first I'll have to describe what kind of data campaigns use and how are they using this data. I'll give you a brief background of the history of data analytics for the past 15 years or so. And then I'll get into how the 2016 campaigns are using and not using data. So you can think about this talk about being in three parts. So the first part is basically pretty much like a class. So how do campaigns use data and what kind of data are they using? The second part is just going to be the brief history of how this has happened in the recent past. And then the last part is going to be about the 2016 election and what we know about the campaigns using data. First, why data? So I think this kind of gets a little bit to Jeff's question of how can we use data to better understand other aspects of politics. For campaigns have only one goal really. They just want to win elections. So, but they have limited resources. They have limited amounts of money, limited numbers of volunteers, and limited time. Campaigns are different than other kinds of practices out there because campaigns are very short-lived. So how do you win an election? And one of the goals of using data is to better allocate your resources. Campaigns are interested mostly in two types of voters, the likely supporters and the persuadable voters. And the persuadable voters are people that you think that you can flip to your side. I want to get a little bit into the details of what kind of data campaigns primarily use. The main source of data and the most important one is the voter files, the state voter files. And this sometimes gets confused, especially if you've taken some of the people in my class, I've noticed, when I talk about voter files, sometimes people think it's voter registration statistics. It's not the same thing. So voter files and voter registration statistics are two different types of data. And this all started to change when we got the Help America Vote Act passed in 2002. And this legislation required the states to keep electronic records of all voters, and also something that was new was to keep their voting history. So now you would have data about every individual voter in the US, and you would know this person voted in the past. We still have the secret ballot. Nobody knows how you voted, but the public record will show if you voted or if you didn't. And this is going to be true for all the states. So with the passage of this legislation, we have new data about voting behavior. I will show you an example of some of the data. So for Colorado, for example, so there's a scholar, Mike McDonald, at the University of Florida that has a website, the Election Project. And there you can see the details about what kind of data is out there for each state. So this is Colorado, and if you go to this website, you could see, you don't get the data. Data is usually sold by the states, with some exceptions. But you can see what kind of data is provided in every state. And this depends on each specific state's electoral institutional environment. So states design their own election laws, and this is going to inform what kind of data they provide. So Colorado, this is loading. So Colorado has, you could get age, you could get the person's name, mailing address, party ID for Colorado and some states. And for some states, you should also get the race of the voter. So it's a little slow.
So for those who might be interested later, you might point out that on REI's website and the live stream, your presentation with these links is posted so that people who may want subsequently to visit some of these websites are easily able to do so. And I'm sorry, if you could repeat that, they will hear it online as well as...
So they get the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, so everybody, you can just access the PowerPoint and the link through the presentation website. And there, if you have fast connection, then you could see this link. But we don't need it. We have the Ohio voter file data. And the thing that's interesting about Ohio is free. So you just go to the website and you can download the data yourself. You have the names of people, you have, this is an example. So this is what most of the voter file data looks like. You have names, date of birth, date of registration, party ID, and so on. Some states keep primary data, so even if they don't have party ID, you might have an indication of how people are voting based on their participation in the primaries. There are two main variables that campaigns are interested in: party ID and race. Now, why is that? That's because these are two highly variables that are very highly predictable of turnout and vote choice. So if you have this information for a voter, you might be able to very accurately guess whether or not they're going to vote and how they're going to vote. And like I said, so here's some example of 6 party registration states of Colorado, Florida, Iowa, New Hampshire, North Carolina. And we have the states with records of racial identity. And as you see here in the slide, these are mostly the southern states. And there's a very good reason for that. That's because of the Voting Rights Act of 1964. But then again, we have other states like Virginia and Wisconsin. Is anybody here from Virginia? So campaigns, so for the people here that are from Virginia, campaigns are going to target you in a very different way than if you were a voter from Florida. If you're a voter from Florida, the campaign knows your party ID and your race. So instantly, that makes it all the more easier. If you are from Virginia, they're gonna have to guess your race, they're gonna have to guess your party ID. So you can imagine how this is now gonna inform a lot of the micro-targeting approaches. And what I mean by micro-targeting is how campaigns are more narrowly using data to focus on potential supporters and opponents and persuadable voters. So here's a table from Eitan Hirsch's book, Hacking the Electorate. And he did a study for this book where he looked at, well, how accurate are predictions based on voter file data compared to commercial data. When states don't have party ID from the voter file, when states don't have race from the voter file, they use other kinds of data to try to figure out who might be black, who might be Hispanic. And what you see here is that predictions on who's white are fairly accurate, regardless of what kind of data you use. But predictions of who's black, for example, are different. So if you have voter file data, it's 95% correct. If you're trying to guess somebody's race about being black or Hispanic from other data sources, the predictions are not as accurate. It's 68% for African Americans and 73% for Hispanic. The way that they try to figure out if somebody's black is that they use statistics based on their neighborhood characteristics. So if you live in a sizable African American neighborhood, they're going to guess, well, you're probably African American. And that's combined with last names. So this is a problem because most people lived and mixed in very diverse precincts. So this kind of approach to trying to figure out who the voters are misses a lot of people that don't necessarily fit into those categories. But that just gives you an idea. So whether you're in Virginia, whether you're in states where the campaigns have voter file data that gives them your party ID and race, is going to determine what kind of approach the campaign takes to mobilizing the electorate. And this is again from Hirsch's book. So it's a map that gives you an idea of what kind of data each state has. And what you see here, the light purple, is no party registration or primary data. And that's very few. So most states have some kind of identifying variables. And the one that's just typical purple is only party registration data, and that's 14 states. And these are the states where for campaigns it's very good news, because for the general election, if you have party ID of the voter, then you already know who your supporters are, and that is going to make the allocation of your resources much more easier and effective. So what is this other data that campaigns use? Well, just about everything that you can think of. Consumer data, one of the most important ones is phone numbers. Phone numbers, because a lot of the phone numbers that people change phone numbers. So a lot of the phone numbers in any of the existing records are outdated. So campaigns buy this data with the idea of being able to target voters with phone calls, or maybe the automated phone calls that sometimes don't work as well, but sometimes they do. Credit card data. So what does your credit card data say about you? If you own a car, if you have an SUV, does that mean you're a Democrat? Of course, gun ownership data is very valuable because it is an indication of whether or not somebody might lean Republican. So all this data is appended to the voter file with the idea of getting this one person. So we saw from Ohio, you have the name of the person, and now let's say, for example, that you have her phone numbers, that you have data from her card at the supermarket, her discount card. It says what kind of products she buys. So what kind of products do people that lean Republican buy? What kind of products do people that lean Democrat buy? And that's the whole idea, to try to figure out who people are with the goal in mind of figuring, well, how do I approach this voter? What is the best way to communicate with them? What do I say as a campaign? So how is the data used? Well, the way that it's being done now, more so after the during and after the 2012 campaign, is that campaigns use.
Dr. Perez, I wonder whether or not there is social media data that's brought into the commercial sources, so Twitter or Facebook posts or what have you.
So I'll get to that near the end. And yes, so for 2008 and 2012, Facebook data was very easy to incorporate with the voter file. And what happens is the campaigns are not really able to do that as well anymore because Facebook and other similar organizations have put a stop to this. And the idea is to protect their consumers' privacy. So for 2012, it was easier for the campaign to take your Facebook data and combine it again. It would give the campaign a lot of information about what kind of voter you are and what kind of message to direct to you, and even to send you ads through your Facebook page. So they would take your browser cookies and just figure out, well, how am I going to target this person? Does that answer your question? So predictive models. Predictive models are campaigns take all this data and they build models to give them the probability of what is the likelihood that somebody is going to support our candidate? What is the likelihood that this person is persuadable? Based on all this consumer data. So you buy a product at the supermarket and somehow that gives the campaign an idea of what kind of voter you are. How likely are you to turn out? And campaigns are not the only ones doing this. A lot of organizations, especially here in DC, also do this. So they, for example, test the likelihood that you're going to respond to an email, or that if they mail you, and this is from the Voter Participation Center, if they mail you a form, a registration form, or how likely are you how likely are you to mail that form back? So usually what a campaign will do is it'll conduct a poll, a micro-targeting survey, just to figure out what are the characteristics of voters in a specific area. They'll match the results of the respondents to the voter file. And then they'll look for patterns in data. And what you get with each of these predictive models is you get a probability, or what they call scores, on your likelihood to support a candidate, your likelihood to vote, your likelihood to be persuadable. So let's say, for example, you have a score of 65% or higher, that you are very likely to support Trump. Then the campaign might make the decision that, well, this is a voter that we want to target. And they'll continue to use more information to figure out how exactly to target you. So again, predictive models to figure out what kind of message you're more likely to respond to. This is not different than what's done by market research. So commercials, you see commercials, you see ads. It's not a lot different. The thing that makes campaigns a lot more different, they are very short-lived. So campaigns have a very short time span to do all of this, so they have to move fast. And like I said, it helps the campaign figure out who to call. Are you going to get a phone call or an automated call? Are you going to get a TV ad placement? And like Jeff mentioned, to figure out how to reach you by social media. But what happens when campaigns don't have, like I said, your party ID information or information about your race? Well, then in that sense, this is what Aiton Hirsch calls perceived voters. They create models of perceived voters. So this is based on the probability that you have certain attributes. So using all of this data, what is the probability that you are married? What is the probability that you have children? If the state has party ID data, the decision is very easy, so target the partisans. If the state does not have party ID data, then they target the perceived partisans. And as you can imagine, the problem with this is that you risk allocating resources to opponents and voters that you can't flip to your side. And that's where the problem comes in.
I wonder, it sounds like a lot of this is to say, let's figure out how best to target our spending to persuade voters. And so then I wonder whether or not there's a rough estimate, how much might a typical campaign spend on the analytics? Is it $1 a voter or $5 a voter that it figures out? And then, you know, again, saves X dollars for targeting the right ones as opposed to the wrong ones.
Right, so campaigns do have such kinds of estimates, and the whole idea when they have a predictive model is to figure out how much it'll cost to target this voter. So I'll give you an example later of, well, if we do this kind of activity, it'll be $11 per vote. And the whole idea is to minimize that. Mm-hmm. But it's not just money, you're trying to limit the use of volunteers in the wrong way. And like I mentioned, time. So if you spend a lot of time targeting people that are not going to support you, that's going to be a problem in the end. Like I said, campaigns are very interested in people that they can persuade, and that's probably even more true in this election, where we see both parties trying hard to get the opponent's supporters. But how do you figure out who persuadable people are? This is very hard to do, and campaigns have been trying to do it for a while, and maybe in the 2016 race they're trying to do it even a bit more. So who are people that you can persuade? The way that it's done with, from the perspective of the campaign and micro-targeting approaches is that they look at two key attributes, whether or not you're an independent and a habitual voter. So if you're an independent and a habitual voter, that suggests that you might be somebody that is persuadable. But again from Hirsch's study, he argues that this is problematic because people that are persuadable from the perspective of a survey, so you conduct a survey and you look at the characteristics of people that might be persuadable. And usually those are people that are going to say up until the end of the election that they're undecided. So they could have several characteristics, being independent, being undecided. And these people don't match very well with people that campaigns are targeting as persuadable voters. So this is a problem, the persuadable perceived voters, because campaigns are creating these models and targeting people that they think are persuadable, but they might not be in the end. And again, it goes back to the idea of, well, is the campaign being effective in its micro-targeting approaches? So this is a line from Daniel Kreis, and he says, well, what campaigns are really doing, they are creating people through data. So in the end, they're trying to create this whole citizens from these hundreds of data points. And it reminds me a lot of science fiction movies, especially all the robots and replicas that you see in science fiction. And I'm using the three examples from HBO's new show Westworld, where they have a whole world where their robots are just like people. Or Inception, where we have people that are manufactured in dreams, but they're almost very real. And this Twilight Zone character that just found out she's a robot. So what these three different characters have in common is that they are almost like humans, but they are not quite perfect. They malfunction at some point in time. So she's not supposed to know that she's a robot. She is going to malfunction later in the show, I imagine. And this is very similar to what campaigns are doing. They're trying to create people, and the perceived voters and perceived persuadable voters are very similar to replicas of human beings. They're not quite like actual people. So it's very similar to what this quote from Inception says. The DiCaprio character is talking to the dream version of his wife, and he says, well, I can't imagine you in all your complexity, all your perfection, all your imperfection. And this is what happens when campaigns are targeting persuadable voters. They can't imagine you in all your complexity. So people are complicated. It's not clear why somebody changes their mind at later time in the election. And the problem with this is that, again, the risk of targeting people that are not going to be on your side. So now to the second part of this talk, I'd like to talk a little bit about how this all started back from about 15 years ago. So I'll just give you a brief history of micro-targeting in the latest elections. So even though we hear a lot about how Democrats have the advantage in data analytics, it was actually the Republicans that pioneered this back in the 90s, especially late 1999, 2000. And they had, since the 90s, they had the database called the Voter Vault, and that's where they kept voter files from the states. The voter files in the 90s weren't as good as the voter files after HAVA, but they still had some information, and they used it to do what's called static micro-targeting. So they would do a poll, figure out the demographics of supporters, and then match that to the information in Voter Vault and target those people. They did a lot of field experiments that, in line with a lot of the research in political science, they found out that, well, in-person canvassing is the best way to talk to voters. And another interesting thing was that they found that neighborhood volunteers are the best for persuasion. So people from your own neighborhood, not outsiders, are more likely to convince you to vote for a candidate. And they also started appending consumer data to the voter file. Back in 99, 2000, McCain's primary campaign was very innovative, and it was one of the first campaigns to do a lot of things that campaigns are doing now. So it was the first campaign with a web page, and McCain would have his web address in just about every opportunity that he could find. You would see the web address, and that's why I have that picture where you can see it right behind him when he won the New Hampshire primary. And these are some pictures of his webpage. Something very innovative was his online phone banking tool. So in the past, and even today, what you had is that you would go to a field office and you could do volunteer calls for your campaign. But now with McCain's campaign, you could go to a website, sign up to be a volunteer, and you would get the names of people that you could call. And those people were calling other voters participating in key primary states. And what they were trying to find out is how likely they were. Were they a McCain supporter, or were they supporting other candidates? And as you can imagine, this is very valuable for primary because you can tell whether or not the people that you're going to target are going to vote for you in the primaries. He was very successful. He raised about $6 million and had an email list of 160,000 people back in 1999, early 2000. And all this data, keep in mind that all this data is going back to the voter vault. So the party is going to have the data for later on and for other cycles and for down the ballot races. So what happens is Karl Rove and the Bush administration adopts this approach that McCain was using, and many other campaigns wanted to do it as well. And they build on it. They build on it, and they have emails. They use emails to recruit volunteers, and they had what they called parties for the president. And for the 2004 campaign, they held about 31,000 people held about 31,000 parties. And what this was that you would sign up to do a party on the website as a volunteer, and then you would just invite other volunteers to come to your house and celebrate the president. So again, very innovative, and they also had rewards for volunteers, and you'll see later on that many of the things campaigns do now is that when you sign up to volunteer, you're able to get some kind of rewards via technology. So here they have the free screen server. That really didn't work out so well. But the idea was fairly good. They have the Walk the Vote tool, and keep this in mind for later on. The Walk the Vote tool is very reminiscent of what campaigns are doing right now. So here in 2004, you would go to georgeWbush.com and register as a volunteer, and you would get a list of voters to target and the script to deliver. And this is again different than going to the office and getting the paper, and then the campaign would record the results you get from your canvassing and put that back in data in the voter vault. So this is again interesting because you can see that the campaign is expanding the data set and expanding the knowledge that they know about voters, about people that are supporting their candidate. At the same time, 2004, the Howard Dean campaign is employing many of these innovations. So we had, again, he had a website where people, meetup.com, where people could go and, similar to the Parties for the President, meet up and arrange some kind of gathering in person from just using emails. The online fundraising for Dean was very successful, so others were inspired to follow on that path. And he also had the first campaign blog. So all these are things that campaigns are doing today, and we're very used to it, but they were very innovative back then. This is the Democratic Party's database, and like Voter Vault, this is Vote Builder. After the 2004 election and Dean didn't win the election, then he became chair of the party. And this is important because then he's bringing all of these approaches to managing the party. And the whole idea was to improve their data analytics efforts. So by 2007, with Vote Builder, they had a nationalized voter file. One thing that they were doing a little different than the Republican Party was that they're using as an interface NGP van. So you might have heard about that. And this is important because it makes it easier to work with the voter file. So you don't need a lot of expertise, you don't need a lot of computer science training, and it allows for collaboration, exchanges between the states and between different kinds of people. The states would send their files to Vote Builder, the campaigns then would add data. So you can imagine this is 2007, more data is going to go in 2008 with the 2008 election, and it continues and continues. What happened?
Has it been your experience that there is a kind of a protectiveness around the data? So for example, would the state willingly share its data with 2 or 3 presidential candidates during the primary phase, or would the states refuse, and then vice versa? Would the losing candidates in the primary share their data with the winning candidate, or not?
So states, being a party is very good in terms of data. States give the data to parties. Parties have a privileged status when it comes to data. And I think there's a lot of legal issues that are involved, and especially for the primaries, on whether the candidates are going to share their own individual data. So I'm not clear on that, but what I understand is that legal issues would be involved. So probably after.
So Ted Cruz didn't share his data with Donald Trump?
I wouldn't think so. I don't know. I can't answer that. So a lot has been said about the Obama 2008 campaign, so I won't get a lot into it, but again, building on that is the idea that now it's possible to have huge email lists of voters. They have more extensive voter files from 2008 that they will use in 2012. There are other factors that, of course, allow the party to do this. So remember I said that one of the problems with all this is time. Campaigns are very short-lived. But according to Daniel Kreis, he's a political communication scholar, he argues that, well, being an incumbent has a technology advantage. So if you're an incumbent, you have a lot more time to do all this. So the fact that Obama was in office in 2008 helped to expand on data analytics for the Democratic Party. So what happens by 2012? 2012 is actually the the most advanced campaign in data analytics so far. So it's not so much the 2008 campaign, but the 2012 campaign. The party has about 800 data points on each voting age individual. One of the innovations that we're seeing by 2012 is that the voter file is being constantly updated. Now, this is different from what was happening in 2004 with the Bush campaign. So back then, we have what's called static micro-targeting. You have a poll, you match the respondents to the voter file, and you have an idea of who's your supporter. But now, that data can be constantly updated. You can conduct, for example, the 2012 Obama campaign conducted about 23 polls in North Carolina just a week before the election. And as the data is coming in, it is going into the system. So everything else that follows from that is going to be constantly updated. Those predictive scores are going to be updated. So this is going to help the campaign better approach the idea of who is a persuadable voter. So Jeff's point earlier, Facebook 2012. So Facebook was a huge part of the 2012 campaign, and again another innovation. You could use the voter file and append it to Facebook data. Well, Obama had an app that about 1 million people installed, and what the campaign was able to do back then was you downloaded the app, and the campaign asked you if it could have the list of your friends. And it got access to those names and then ran them against the voter file and was able to figure out, well, who's a supporter, who's an opponent, who's a persuadable voter. And as of 2014, that's no longer possible. Facebook put a stop to it due to privacy concerns. And now the campaign can't just get your friend data. So now what they do is if you download an app, it'll get your data, and only if your friend also has the app can the campaign get their name. So as you can see, this limits some of the information that campaigns can get from your Facebook activities. So what happens? Well, this is again from Daniel Kreese's research. So he argues that one thing that has helped the Democratic Party advance in terms of data analytics is that after each election, the former staffers from the campaign would found their own institutions, and many of them, and some of you probably work in some of them right here, and many of them would institutionalize and continue to innovate on what was done during the election. And this didn't happen so much on the Republican side. So after the election is over, people go back to their jobs and don't continue adding to what they were doing before. But when you have organizations, let's say like Blue Labs, then you continue to work on what you were doing and you're continuing to improve that work. And so this is what's happened. By 2014, Democrats had about 67. And it's not necessarily Democratic, many of them are nonpartisan, but they're progressive leaning organizations. Whereas the Republicans had about 15. So it limits what you can do and how data analytics are used for the party. So now I'll turn to the last section. How are the 2016 campaigns using data and how are they not doing it? The Clinton campaign benefits a lot from the Obama data operation. So Clinton inherited a lot of his former staffers, and Ellen Kriegel, for example, Clinton's director of analytics, he worked on the 2012 Obama campaign. And this picture is from all the staff, data analytics staff at the Brooklyn office. So when talking about what exactly the Clinton campaign is doing, we need to keep in mind that a lot of what they are actually doing are secretly guarded secrets. We don't know exactly the specifics or the results of the work that they're doing. So we know that they're doing some field experiments, and what they're trying to do is figure out when is the best way to contact a voter. Is it best to contact them now, or would it be best to contact them just a week before the election? And they're also integrating academic research a little bit better than in the past. There's a recent paper on field experiments by Brockman that argues that when you do canvassing, it's not a campaigns paper, but in the end they talk about, well, for campaigns when they do canvassing, it is possible to persuade people to the other side through conversations. So it's possible that the campaign is integrating that research. We don't know that. Something else they're doing is they had for the primaries, they had a TV tool where they try to predict the support for a at the congressional district level for Clinton, and then target those media markets, again, based on predictive scores to determine what kind of ad was best to have in that media market. And they made some changes to their webpage so that encouraging people to keep their credit card information. And this is very useful from the campaign's perspective because if your credit card information is in the webpage, then it's easier to encourage you to donate again and again and again. There are app innovations, so if you think back to the 2004 Walk the Vote tool that Bush had, this is again very similar, but more innovative. And it builds from, or it is almost exactly like Sanders's Feel the Burn app. And it's an improvement on what was done before. So you have a volunteer and they just have the phone instead of having to go to the field office, get a list of names to go visit and addresses. Well, here you have an app, you open it, you have the address and name of the people. But if you could see, or if you can see closer, it'll tell you, well, is this person a strong Bernie supporter? Is it an unlikely voter? An undecided voter? And the Hillary 2016 app has all of these elements. And it also incorporates rewards for volunteers, and it also makes it very easy to donate. And this was just started just a few months ago, so in the late summer. She's also using Facebook. And the whole idea here is that you download the app and you Trump yourself. And it's to inform voters of the kind of comments that Trump has mentioned. But the real goal from the campaign's perspective is that by signing up, they collect your information. Once the campaign has your information, it's easy to append it to the voter file and figure out whether or not they should target you and how they should target you. Also, nonpartisan and nonprofits are doing a lot of work on the 2016 election to try to improve the data analytics approaches from the past. So one thing that Don Green is doing in collaboration with Civic Nation here in DC is field experiments on election day festivals. They did this kind of work before, back in 2007. What they're trying to figure out is if elections are similar to how they were in the 19th century. So are elections more, do people vote because elections are a social activity? So back in the 19th century, campaigns would hold festivals, they would hold parades, and turnout back then was 80 to 90% nationwide and 90% in some states. So is this what would boost turnout, they're asking. And they're doing it for the first time in the 2016 election. And what they want to see is if it boosts turnout. They hypothesize that for a presidential election, it is very likely to boost turnout. It did so before in other types of elections by about 3%. And for campaigns, this would be very useful because it costs about $11 per vote. So these festivals are very cheap. They just have food. They are conducted near a polling place. What they're doing, or what they're trying to do, is that they are trying to have them on early voting days as well. So, and Green expects that this might even be lower the cost for presidential elections. So you have a lot more people. They're done both in inner cities and in suburban areas, and they have proven to boost turnout in both types of places. So we'll see the results after the 2016 election. So what about the Republican side on 2016? Well, after the 2012 Obama campaign, the Republicans published the Growth and Opportunity Project. And many people refer to that as an autopsy. And that report basically acknowledged that they need to build their data infrastructure. They knew that the Democratic Party had an advantage in data analytics, and they were trying to figure out, well, how can we be competitive against the Democratic Party? And here in the picture is several data analysts trying to figure out how Republicans can win with tech. So one example is the Cruz and Trump campaign during the primaries. The Cruz campaign was very well known for having a very strong ground game, and he had a very data-driven campaign. The Trump campaign, well, the idea was to hold big rallies and maybe no data. But then, how is it possible that Trump won the election, but Cruz didn't win the election? So what explains that? Well, I'll talk a little bit about what Cruz was doing. He had hired a firm called Cambridge Analytica. This is a British firm. And they're doing something that's very different from what other data analytic firms are doing. And they're using a 5-factor model, and this is from psychology, to determine your openness, your conscientiousness, your extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And depending on how you score on each of these characteristics, they figure out whether or not you're a supporter or opponent and how they should speak to you. So if you go to their website, you'll see that, you know, one of the arguments is that they know you better than you know yourself. And many you'll hear this very often. With micro-targeting, the campaign will know you better than you know yourself. And here they have a picture of 2 women that have the same demographic but different personalities. So one scores very high on openness and the other one scores very low. So one example that they give is that, let's say you score low on conscientiousness and agreeableness. Well, then that means that you're an individualistic person. If you're an individualistic person, then the campaign is going to go to you and tell you about Cruz. Well, he's got new ideas, fresh ideas. You're going to be able to file your taxes in a postcard. They're going to emphasize the message that Cruz is an outsider. And that's hopefully going to appeal to you as an individualistic person.
So how are campaigns coming up with these measures of agreeableness and
this is from psychology. So it's called the 5-factor model. So they're using research from psychology.
But what so they're not, have they implemented this strategy?
They implemented this, yes.
So what variables fed into those measures?
They do surveys.
Okay.
So they do surveys to try to figure out where you fit into all of this.
Okay.
So it's subjective, it seems like.
There's been a lot of criticism about it. I think we don't really know how this has worked, but from people that do everything else that I've been talking about, this is fairly innovative. So they basically don't think that this is a good way to figure out, because again, it goes back to the idea that people are so complicated. So is it true that how you score on this measures that you're going to be persuadable? They're mostly trying to figure out who the persuadable people are. Right. And the idea is, well, maybe if we use psychology, we can figure out who the persuadables are.
So I assume that people who sell soap do something like this too, and that's where they.
I imagine, yes, but again, then the difference is that if you sell soap, you're not tied to that campaign schedule that makes things so much harder.
So I wonder if it's kind of direct psychology. Say you have 1,000 voters, do you administer a Myers-Briggs test to each to discover their profile? Or do you use indirect information, like they bought Tide, therefore we think they are, a conformist?
Both. So you do the survey and you combine it with indirect information. And the hope is that by doing that, you'll have a good idea of who the people are. So.
I guess you would then learn which pieces of indirect information can be, and then you don't have to survey everyone. could just look at the Tide consumer purchase.
Hopefully, but they do the surveys, and that again, and then that's also more done on presidential campaigns because they have the money. So it all goes back to, does the campaign have the money to do that kind of surveys? But we don't know. We wouldn't know. This is fairly new. So
do they just ask them, or are they able to say you're clicking on, say certain websites, and so therefore we know that even if you're saying you don't look at porn, you actually are.
I wouldn't know if they do that. They might infer from other data. They might infer that.
Right. Okay.
So Cruz's, just to finish Cruz's story, so he had Cambridge Analytica. He used it up until February, and then I believe he went with other firms. And there's been some criticism about this approach. Trump, even though a lot has been said about how Trump has not used data in the primaries, well, according to the evidence, he did use data, at least in some ways, and this is Trump's data strategies for the primaries. And his approach was very interesting and different. So he thought that the campaign should target unlikely voters. 100% of our effort should go in enfranchising low propensity voters. Again, very interesting. This is not at all what campaigns do. Campaigns want people that vote. And if you're going to spend time and money on people, you want to make sure that they cast the ballot. The best way to predict whether or not somebody's going to cast the ballot is if they did it before. So targeting unlikely voters is interesting, new, and just completely different from what campaigns do. And he called it a radically different strategy for a radically different candidate. So here's the voter math. So we have this equation, and what it means basically is, so we have two coefficients. P is the likelihood of voting for a Republican in the Republican primary, and T is the likelihood that you're going to support our candidate. So Trump supporters are people that are low on P, according to Brainerd, and high on turnout. These are the people that we want. We want to target people that haven't voted before, but that love our candidate. So this was the goal. In this memo where he wrote this plan, he also talked about we should ignore the high P voters, the people that vote often in elections. And he argued that Trump has a lot of free media. So a lot of the campaign strategies are trying to figure out, well, how to reach voters and what kind of media to use to approach them. But he says, well, the high P voters are already getting all the messages through free media, and Trump is also very good at using social media to counter any attacks. So it wasn't necessarily the goal. He talked about the advantage of targeting unlikely voters because other candidates are going to ignore them, and that's true. Most campaigns are going to ignore people that don't vote. So there we have a segment of the population that we could just have all for ourselves. And these low P voters are often referred to as stupid, racist, and bigots. So how should the campaign approach them? Well, he recommended using a warm message. I'm a volunteer for Mr. Trump's campaign. We'd like you to join us to help make America great again. Can we count on your support, on your vote for this upcoming primary? And the idea of approaching them with this message is that it creates a safe place and that will encourage them to vote. So what he wanted was to target these unlikely voters and to have them vote in the primaries. So we don't have the results of this, but that is one of the data approaches that Trump used for the primary elections, or that it is claimed that they used. There were also reports that Brainerd had used the progressive-leaning firm, Haystack DNA, and that they had accessed the data by going through a third vendor. So maybe they used Democratic Party data to try to figure out who they should target. But again, this is just a report, so we don't have all the information on that. So what happens? Well, Trump changes a little bit the data strategy by the general election, and this is very recently. There's reports that, well, he once was a skeptic, but now he's spending millions of data, and that's true. For this app, for example, they spend about 8 million. It's called America First, and it's similar to the Hillary 2016 app. So here you can log in, you can get rewards, play games, engage other people. I imagine it helps volunteers to canvas and also encourages donations. So as you might imagine, the problem might be that it's a little too late. One of the advantages of having a data analytics approach for your campaign is that you are collecting data and you're collecting supporters and you're collecting all these names and all this money, that it becomes very valuable as it gets bigger and bigger. So you need time for that. So a potential disadvantage for the Trump campaign might be that, well, this embracing of data analytics might be too late to help them catch up with the opposition. So the building of the email list, the volunteer base, all of that might have been bigger had this app, for example, been in place earlier on. So those are some of the arguments out there on that. So where do the parties go next based on what they're doing in 2016? Well, it looks like for Republicans that they might still lag behind the competition. And that's because during a presidential election, you have a big opportunity to build that volunteer base and the base of small donors, and to gather information about people that are supporters or persuadables. So by going in it a little bit late, it might require more time to catch up. For the Democrats, they would need to maintain what they're doing and continue to innovate on the data infrastructure. Otherwise, it's very easy for the Democratic Party to fall in the same way that Republicans did after 2004. So unless the data analytic approach is institutionalized somehow, it's because campaigns are so short-lived, it's very easy to just, everything just seizes.
I wonder if, I know it's too early for the 2016 election, but maybe for the 2008 election, is there information that says the Democrats spent $50 million on analytics, on employees and on computers and on consulting services or research, and the Republicans spent $10 million. And then on a per vote basis, for the $50 million, the Democrats, overall total received, 50 million votes, so it was $1 a vote. Is any of that information available about kind of how much they're spending on analytics?
I think there's information on how much they're spending, but whether or not the spending leads to a vote, that's not possible, because it's impossible to know exactly what is the effect of your data analytic approach on the outcome. Mm-hmm. So you can't really go as far as saying, well, we spent 50 million and that bought us this many votes.
But even if you said, well, the full number of votes, just every vote cast, do we know, is it in the range of $1 a vote or $10 a vote that's being spent on analytics?
I don't have that information, but I think, like I said, because campaigns, there are all these other factors that go into whether or not people vote. Mm-hmm. So it's always what is argued is that data analytics only helps maybe increase the vote from 1% to 3%. So it's really not clear, and again, it depends on from election to election. So for 2008, for example, even though they had all the data analytic advantages, it really was argued that Republicans were not going to win that election because of many the fundamentals. It's called the fundamentals of the campaign, so I don't think you could get that specific.
How good is it proving to be that the data analysis can confirm or deny the truth of what the polls are showing? For example, Michigan looked like it was going to Romney, and the data team for Obama said, no, that's not what we're seeing. And so they didn't do a big, huge diversion of resources into Michigan. And I read a Wired article not too long ago where they thought they saved 20 million just on that decision, which could have paid for the whole data operation. And I'm just wondering if it's like just...
Is your question on polling?
Well, it's,
So-
you know, because the 1 or 2%
Mhm.
figure you gave, yeah, that's obviously, you know, I defer to you on that. But just on this resource allocation, that you can see the myth and the truth because you have better data, and you don't do the moving the candidate over to the wrong place. And so that is real money. And it affects the numbers even bigger, I think, than, you know, it's not a direct, but an indirect, just being able to fight your war better. So
Well, that's the whole idea. You're trying to use the micro-targeting approaches to try to figure out where you don't want to spend money.
Right.
But not just money, other resources. So I would think so. Because I think what you're saying is the polling approach versus the data. So is the comparison between micro-targeting as it was done back then.
And it's not just, it's internal polling versus what we're all, you know, stuck watching on CNN and
Right.
SNBC every night where,
Right, and we never have access to the internal polls.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So they have the real story and we're just kind of guessing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the real value. I mean, it's hard to put a number on that value.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, Dr. Perez, if you've thought about potential uses of some of these techniques in kind of just the day-to-day administration of government in between elections. And I've thought a little bit about it, and I thought, well, the government might need good analytics to decide who it trusts to grant a security clearance. And after having spoken with a couple of folks in the room who are parts of inspectors general, you know, perhaps the government could use analytics to say, you know, which doctors or which patients might cheat Medicaid, or which immigrants, you know, should we consider and perhaps grant citizenship to. Are there applications of these analytics that you've thought about or you've observed in, again, the kind of the day-to-day administration of government?
I think there are a lot of applications, especially for policy passage, that you could use. And a lot of my students actually, in fact, many of them come to my class with the intention of not using data analytics for campaigns, but using it, I had a student that used it for education. So I think there definitely are many applications. I know of a recent one for medicine, and that's Aiden Hirsch again. So he has a paper, I believe, on whether or not doctors' partisan affiliations affects how they treat their patients. And I thought, when I learned about that, I thought, well, how do you get that information? Well, of course, you go to the voter files, and then you know whether or not your doctor's a Republican or a Democrat, and you combine that with other information. And I think it has so many uses for just about every policy area that you can imagine.
I guess as a government agency, how do we access that information to actually implement this in the real world?
So this is, we were talking about this. So you would need some kind of contract with the vendors that have the information. Like I said, you could easily go to the states that give you the voter file. So you could purchase it yourself. So if you go to that website, electionproject.org, it'll tell you whether or not the state would give you the voter file. But what people do, and what I'm most familiar with, is Catalyst. So Catalyst has all data, and they also have the updated data. So they're constantly updating it and appending it to consumer data. So the way that you would access it is by going through one of these vendors.
Just the second part on that is privacy issues, and it's a huge issue within the government using information and data. Have you dealt with that? How do you deal with that? In terms of using the data and people feeling that you're infringing on their privacy.
Well, I've used Catalyst before, and I think that you go back to just all the ways that you deal with any kind of data that has private information. So people are usually just a number. Even though you have their names, they just become a number or something. That there are different methods that you can use to protect their privacy, so you don't have to share that. But then again, this is all, if it's public, like that Ohio data I showed, that's not private information.
Are you aware of occasions where, for example, the Obama administration's campaign said, hey, the Obama campaign said, hey, for the campaign we gathered this data, let's hand it to a particular federal department because that department might really need the data, kind of where it's ported over from the campaign to the administrative agency?
I'm not aware of any specific examples, but I know that as a party, what really helps the Democrats is that they share and collaborate with the data. So they have Vote Builder and NGPV ban. So if they wanted to do that, I'm sure that they could access it, because it's not just the campaign itself; it's the party has the data.
But healthcare.gov proved that they weren't collaborating. Bad joke.
So I think that, does anyone else have a question before
I have a question.
So go end with you.
The cruise camp clearly had very, very, very sophisticated data analytics operation, but despite all their strengths, cruise is not on the final Republican ticket. And then you had the Trump camp, who had a much leaner data effort underway, and Trump is on the ticket. So the question I have is, going forward, when you have an emotionally charged season like we have now, what alternate analytical strategies can people use, whether it be a campaign team or program administrators? What analytical strategy can they use to get more people to buy into an important issue that's very, very charged?
So I think that's what the Trump campaign was doing. They were doing the exact opposite, mostly using traditional approaches. So when you talk about data analytics, there's the traditional approaches, and then there's the modern micro-targeting approaches.
But what can program administrators do? I mean, from your vantage point, what lessons learned would you encourage program administrators to use to move forward?
Pertaining to campaigns?
To get constituents to buy into a very emotionally charged but important issue.
Mm-hmm. I mean, are you saying?
Let's say like
how to speak to people,
or something like that.
Are you trying to figure out how to approach consumers, basically?
Consumers, constituents, and,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a couple of policy options on the table, and maybe you feel that option C is the best for whatever reason. You want to position yourself to leverage analytics to get people to buy into option C.
So you would use a micro-targeting approach. So you can use the data to try to figure out. You have to figure out who those constituents are, and then you could do a survey, and then again go back to tie the respondents' names to the data that you do have. But I thought you were saying what alternative to that you could use. And the alternative then would be your traditional approaches of just using a blanketed approach. So instead of going to each constituent, instead of looking at your constituents as individuals, you would look at them as demographics. And this is what was done in the past. So the blanketed approach of sending out your mailers, for example, to everybody in the neighborhood, as opposed to sending out a mailer to the 5 people that you know are going to support you. And that's actually not a bad approach, because there are risks to micro-targeting. It tends to also backfire. So many people are turned off by getting a message that is supposedly directed to them. Many people actually in this campaign are getting Trump advertisements, and they actually, that demobilizes them. So if you use a blanketed approach, you might spend more, maybe, but then again, you might convince other people.
I'm actually seeing a connection here that's at the kind of the most basic part of what Dr. Perez described, which is find the persuadables and then focus energy on them. It seems like within an administrative program, if you need support from a bunch of stakeholders, that same core message I think is useful, which is find the people who are persuadable. And then, Dr. Perez is suggesting, well, there's a lot of sophistication about micro-targeting subsets of those. You may or may not want to do that within your program. But you could use data analytics, again, to find the persuadables.
Right, so you could use data analytics, or the alternative would be to use blanketed approaches.
Including inbound marketing, which means make it where anybody can come to you and sign in as being interested, which is what social media did.
I also just find not necessarily targeting, but really just figuring how effective a program is. I think that's much more important when it comes to government money, is really figuring out how effective your program is, what you're targeting the money that's coming towards you, and that's where it's most useful. It's like we have a responsibility. How do we show that we're using this responsibility, this money, and this issue, and it's working towards the final end? And that's how I use it.
That's a good point. There was a question back there?
I just want to add that I guess my reluctance in frequently using micro-targeting is that I think in this age there are a lot of issues on the table that people, I don't think people fully know how to feel about them. I can think of several issues. I personally, I'm not quite sure. I think only till the time comes for you to make a game time decision will you really know where you stand. And because of that prevalence of indecisiveness that I think we're all encountering in some shape or form, that's playing into the limits of data analytics. And I think that phenomenon was probably a sizable impediment for the campaign and the data analytic operation.
Right, and one of my points here today is focusing on the limits. So when I mentioned Hirsch's perceived voters and the perceived persuadable voters, and for example, one of the first tables I showed where you could see that predictions of people's races were far off when you base them from other kinds of data. Well, that all suggests the limits of analytics. But campaigns are, again, they're trying to realize that goal of creating real people through data. So right now it's very limited. The hope is that it'll continue to innovate up until the point where you can figure out who are like you said, people change their mind all the time. So for example, when Obama 2012 was conducting those 23 polls just a week before the election in North Carolina, that's trying to capture how people are changing their mind and what factors are going into that. And there's a lot of political science research on how people make opinions and how they decide on who they're going to vote for. So definitely, voters are very complicated.
Unfortunately, we're at time, at the end of our allotted time for our breakfast. So I want to thank our speaker,
Thank you so much.
Perez, for a fantastic presentation. Just check our website, the Government Analytics website and the REI Systems website for our next event. We don't currently have it on the calendar yet, but just keep checking. It'll be up there soon. And thank you very much for coming. Grab some more food on the way out, please.